Hi, this is Tamara Cincik from Fashion Roundtable. Today we're going to be discussing the impacts of Brexit on the fashion industry. It's something we're very concerned about at Fashion Roundtable and was part of the reason that I set up Fashion Roundtables to begin with. When I was working in Parliament, I was seeing a lot of discussions about the potential impacts of Brexit, but I wasn't hearing much from our sector. And our industry makes over 35 billion is the latest accounts, or certainly was pre-COVID, for the UK economy, and employs up to 890,000, or certainly these were the pre-COVID numbers. And it's not just a UK sector issue. This will impact both on international business and trade relationships, but also on our EU relationships and people from the EU travelling to the UK and staying here and studying here, and also UK residents studying and travelling and working in the EU. As the data I'm getting is that very much things are about to change from New Year's Eve. So I've got here with me Nav, who works at UK in a Changing Europe and is our politics expert. I have Swati Dhingra, who is Associate Professor of Economics at the LSE and is our economics expert. And I have Alison Cole, who is Senior Trade Attorney, have I got that right, at UDL. I always get this wrong, so I apologise if I've got that wrong. Have I got that right, Alison?
Trademark attorney.
Trademark attorney, that's it. Sorry, I knew there was a word and I was like, I got it right. Sorry about that. So we'll be discussing and looking at the various situations. And I understand that a lot of people have switched off from the Brexit conversation and the Brexit news. There's been so much in the last year about the pandemic. But the forecasts are that the impacts of Brexit long term, particularly for the UK economy, but actually for the entire global economy, are going to be greater, more for the UK than others, but will have a greater impact on our economy here in the UK and our impacts on our ongoing trade relationships. So first of all, if I could go to Nav, it would be fantastic to hear where we're at now. This is going out on Thursday, so I know that this is a very important week in Parliament, but it's always felt like every week has felt like the week. And those of us like me who are interested or slightly obsessed with Brexit have always said, oh, this is the week that changes everything. And then there's another week about 2 months later. But I just wondered where we're at with things now.
So kind of just following up from that, it's pretty much everyone is waiting for a deal to be reached. And that even in itself is quite, it's very, very hopeful because there is still, again, a very possibility that we could end up with a no deal Brexit. So in terms of where we are and what to kind of expect, I suppose, in the next few days or weeks and so forth, is that in Parliament itself, as you kind of already mentioned in your intro, Tamara, was COVID is very much dominating the votes in the House of Commons at the moment. Of course, today we've got the votes on the tier system, and very likely we're going to be seeing Tory disunity. The Labour opposition have abstained from the vote, so that's pretty much dominating what's happening there. But you're right, Brexit is kind of second, a priority when it comes to the news headlines. But they are very much still waiting on a deal. So negotiations are still continuing. We did see last week that one of the key negotiators tested positive for COVID. So they have now resumed to doing virtual negotiations. And basically what is happening within the UK Changing Europe and with reporters and journalists down in the Brexit kind of sphere is waiting on tenterhooks as to when a deal will be reached. There are some saying that it is likely to be a deal reached this week. Some are saying it's very likely to be next week. In terms of why there is a lot of hope that there will be, or anticipation that there will be a deal reached this week, is that both sides have said that this week is so important for a deal to be reached, because otherwise, if it stretches further, then the ratification process gets overly complicated. And not to get bogged down too much into the kind of details of the ratification process, but that is the process by which all the countries agree on what has been decided between the UK and EU. And that does take weeks. So lots of people are saying that this week is imperative that a deal does get decided. There's also one of the things that has been, I suppose, a stumbling block in not being able to reach a deal is fisheries. And I suppose the disunity over the fishing quotas, the UK are saying we want to retain our fishing rights, whereas the EU are saying no, well, now that you've left the EU or about to leave the EU, we get more control over the waters. That apparently is now being slightly, well, let's put it this way, the number of issues that were disagreed upon are becoming smaller and smaller. So they are nearly reaching a deal, but no kind of, nothing confirmed or official that everything has been agreed when it comes to the fisheries section of the negotiation. The other thing is also level playing field. That's another stumbling block with the negotiators. These are basically roles that are designed to ensure that British businesses can conduct the same way that they did before, when they were an EU member, while still retaining access to EU markets and so forth. And that has proven to be one of the biggest stumbling blocks, and one that the EU is not willing to budge. So that, however, they've proven to make some progress with that this week. But yet again, it's just still difficult for me to sit here and say, oh yes, a deal will be reached by the end of this week. It's still very much on tenterhooks. So that's the kind of overall landscape with the negotiators. Outside of that, there is a lot of heat turning up within Parliament, in that the national leaders should come up with a strategy in case there is a no-deal Brexit. You might have seen in the Telegraph today, William Hague, who is a former Conservative leader, has said that the fact that there is no strategy in place for a no-deal Brexit goes to show the failure of statesmanship from Boris Johnson's government. So there needs to be there does need to be some form of kind of a plan B, if you will, but nothing has come up in the pipeline. The only thing that has actually come to fruition in terms of talks is that both Michael Gove, who is one of the lead political figures in dealing with the negotiations, and Alok Sharma, who's the current business secretary, have come up with a border operations centre, which is, I think, a task force to ensure that there is very, very short-term disruption over borders. But yeah, the deadline for a deal to be reached is December 31st. So the clock is ticking now that we are on the first day of December. And it's just very much kind of a waiting game. That's kind of the overall landscape.
And do you get a sense that they're going to try to get an extension because people falling sick and having to self-isolate above in number 10 last 2 weeks? And
I think that we're a very difficult one to push forward, to be honest. I'm sure they probably want an extension. Of course, COVID has added a spanner to the works. But I think pushing forward an extension is just going to be a huge PR comms disaster for Downing Street. I really think it would, given that the sort of kind of attitude and reaction that they've had to the whole thing this year has been, very, very lax. And so I think asking for an extension would be pushing it. And of course, any sort of extension would have to be agreed upon by MPs as well. And that would be a very difficult process to run through. So I think it would be unlikely.
And what do you think the mood in the EU is? Because obviously this was a focus for them for a number of years, and now their focus is on COVID. But also the news this morning, on the day that we're recording this, is that the EU is looking to make a kind of super deal with the States. Where does that leave the UK?
A frustration. I think they are incredibly frustrated by this. I think one of what they feel is that David Frost and the kind of the UK negotiating team are just not budging on particular issues, namely fisheries, level playing field. They're not taking it as seriously. What we also need to bear in mind is that it's 1 against 27 member states who make up the EU bloc, and they need to prepare as much as we do, but they need to prepare amongst themselves as well on a no-deal Brexit. If the deal is reached, they also need to prepare for that as well. And given that we're approaching Christmas, New Year, that also adds to the delays. That also adds to the kind of the sort of priorities that need to be put in check before the holidays begin. So I think there is definitely frustration on their part. In terms of a super deal with the US, that's to be honest with you, that's not surprising. I think now we've got a new president, an administration coming in next month. I think a lot of countries are keen to build a quick trade deal with the US or some sort of relationship. And Joe Biden, who's the president-elect, is a lot more forthcoming and approachable and receptive to the EU than the previous administration was. So I think they'll definitely want to take advantage of that.
So a no-deal Brexit. I mean, you've been part of so many events over the last 2 years, and we've had this as kind of like the bogeyman, the horror.
Yeah.
What does it look like, really?
So a no-deal Brexit, how would that affect you, I suppose? So a no-deal Brexit would mean, basically why the UK are trying to negotiate an agreement, a deal with the EU, is so that there could be some sort of template, a print of some form that could basically design the work and trading relationship with the EU. If there is none of that, then everything kind of falls by the wayside, because there's nothing that we can, there's no guidance, if you will. So things, you're looking at trade disruptions, border check disruptions, how it could affect you personally is, driving into EU countries, you might need to have a different driver's license. There's also going to be roaming charges if that's not, clarified as to whether people will be charged more on their phones. A no agreement basically would also mean issues with visas, work permits. In terms of, what we're talking about today as well with fashion, is that designer brands will also need to get the right paperwork for importation, exportation of goods, models, trading rights. There's also the trading zones as well between different brands in different countries. So if none of that is put in place, and if there is no template, then it's just going to be chaotic.
And what does that mean for Tier 3 Kent, who's already in a lockdown, if you've got a massive lorries trying to get in and out of Dover?
I think, to be honest with you, the reason why Michael Gove and Alok Sharma have put together this kind of border operation, I'm not sure what the exact name of this task force is. I think it was something along the lines of a border operation task force. The reason why that is
like that, something
like that they must have coined. The reason why they've put this in place is because they are fully aware and anticipate that there is going to be short-term disruption on the Kent borders, regardless of a deal or no deal. And that is likely to be in the first few weeks of the new year. So that is very, very likely to happen. So that is one of the things that we're definitely going to see in Kent. So we're looking at all the way along Folkestone and Dover. And we're not just talking about a queue of lorries and so forth. We're looking at the custom checks, the border, the paperwork. That's all going to take a lot of time. It's going to be an administrative nightmare. But in terms of the tier, I'm not sure if Alison might know more than me, but I think this tier 3 is in place until December 14th. So it might be lifted after that, and we might be back in, I don't know, it might be some other kind of regulations, I'm not sure. But then you never know, in January, we might be in a whole different new situation here. We might be in another kind of, strict national lockdown like we were back in March. So
another lockdown and a no-deal Brexit is such an exciting year to look forward to, isn't it? I just can't wait after the year we've had.
It will be tricky. No, you're absolutely, and it's a really good question to ask, because how do you respect the social distancing and the lockdown rules while also still managing the fact that we are just grasping being out of the EU and dealing with these border checks and queues and so forth? It's a good question to ask. I can imagine it will be quite chaotic.
Thank you, Nav. I think that's a really good overview of the ongoing confusions about the situation that people have been trying to get strategy and clarity on for a long time, and that time is pressing, and that is definitely panic-inducing, especially at a time when the news and the focus isn't on it, which makes it even more worrying, because things can happen without people being aware of them.
But you never know. If the deal is reached, then fantastic. At least that's something that we can work from. But it's the no-deal Brexit that, economists and political scientists have all stressed that is, not a situation you want to be in.
No, I can imagine. Thank you for that, Nav. Alison, as a senior trademark attorney for the industry, primarily for the fashion industry, I guess it's a good time to be in your job, because there's people looking to get paperwork done. But what does this all look like, this red tape?
It's quite interesting because more decisions have been made in the IP field than in lots of the ones that Nav mentioned. I've been trying to get the message out for a long time that fashion and creative industry affects so many more people than the fishing industry. The fishing industry employs the same number of people as Topshop, and that's one store. So it's important, and actually behind the scenes quite a lot has happened. So we're in a much better situation in terms of being able to give advice as to what is going to happen. So if you've already got your brand protected, and if you have an EU trademark that currently covers the UK, that won't be the case after 31st December. You'll be given a comparable right in the UK automatically. You don't need to do anything. So if you're already protected, great, you've got your comparable right. There will be an increase to your costs because registrations have to be renewed every 10 years, and you will now have to renew your UK one and your EU one. But your rights will be there. You will still be protected. And likewise, designs, it's every 5 years. But again, you don't lose anything. If you have a pending application, if you haven't got it registered yet, then it's a little less certain as to what's going to happen. You will have 9 months to reapply in the UK to cover what you had for your EU right. So it's there. Again, you shouldn't lose anything as long as you do it within that 9 months. And I suspect that 9 months is probably a period that's been granted for a lot of things to happen, a lot of transitional events to finish. So that's in a lot of respects, that's kind of it. If you haven't got protection in place, you're going to have to apply separately now in the EU and the UK. And again, that's going to be more expensive than it would have been. But suggest you do it now before the 31st. Don't wait, because there will be backlogs with this creation of a comparable right, and there will be confusion as to what's covered where. One good thing from a professional point of view that has happened is that if you have a UK right, you will now have to have a UK address for service, and generally that would be a firm of attorneys like ours. What was the case is that you could have an address in the EEA, which meant that an attorney in the rest of the EU could represent you in the UK, which meant that the UK profession was severely under threat from competition from EU attorneys who could be a one-stop shop for anybody wanting protection in the EU and the UK, whereas we were not going to be allowed to continue to practice in the EU. So 31st of December, I lose half my qualifications and 20 years of experience. Nothing I can do about that. But at least the UK profession is protected. And the reason that's important is because without it, there's no access to anybody in the creative industry in the UK to any specialist advice on protecting their brand. So that's only happened in the last week. That's a big deal for us.
Massive.
The thing to think about in terms of other preparation is, as Nav was talking about, if your trade is going to change, if who you are going to trade with is going to change, you need to make sure you've got brand protection in those countries. So if you currently are doing everything within the EU, great. You're going to carry on, brilliant. But if you're going to now instead outsource to further afield, you probably need to get your brand protected in those countries. And likewise, with the borders being more complicated, you've got your rights protected through registrations, be that trademark or design or a patent, then it'll be much easier to stop anybody trying to import counterfeit goods. And I suspect with the chaos, that's probably going to be rife in the next year or so.
So you're expecting an influx of counterfeit?
Well, people are opportunists. They did it with COVID. The brands that got registered that really shouldn't have done, people claiming things, having a go. It happened with Black Lives Matter, with people protecting trademarks, which were nothing to do with charitable organisations or any kind of protest movement. So it just happened. And I think, yes, if there's chaos anywhere, then there'll be people trying to take advantage of it.
I mean, we've heard on other interviews that will be across this week that one of the ones that's coming out the day before this, that under COVID, some of the companies in Leicester that claimed furlough for staff were not furloughing their staff. So, yeah, there are opportunists across all sides of the sector.
There are.
So we were leaving the EU to reduce red tape, but that is not the case.
Not initially, no.
And what about longer term? Are we going to have less red tape?
Not from protecting your rights, because you're going to have separate rights in the UK and the EU. And at the moment, as with all the other laws, they'll run side by side, but they will diverge, and it will then get more complicated to enforce your rights. And if you've used it somewhere but not had a registration, then that use may or may not count to help you. It might be taken into account, it might not. Currently, if you have an EU trademark and you only use in one member state, it keeps the whole thing alive. That will change. So if you've had an EU trademark and all of your use has been actually just in the UK, then you might lose the EU part anyway, even if you kept it as a property right challenge. So there will be inevitable more red tape.
Fantastic. So more red tape, more cost, more hassle, more delays. Great.
But we have a bit more certainty in what we're doing.
So you have a bit more certainty, but not if there's a no deal.
It doesn't. No, it's already been decided. It will happen.
Okay, so that will happen whether there's a no deal or not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what if we go to a trade deal with other? How do trade deals opening up affect your trademarks for your business?
In terms of what we're doing, not very much. It's much more would affect people who need protection.
Right.
So if you suddenly are doing a lot of business with Canada and you haven't got your trademark protected dates, so that's where we would come in to help with that. But in terms of our workload, we might get more. We will get more incoming UK work. So instead of competing with our EU attorneys, we'll actually be complementing and working with them. If you need a global agreement, you're going to need attorneys in all these different countries. But in terms of the work we're doing, we do a lot of that anyway. But I think people might need to be a bit more wider looking in terms of where they protect their trademarks and their designs, because of where they might be trading or might be sourcing from. If your brand is being applied, if labels are being put in a country outside the UK and outside the EU, you need protection in that country most of the time.
Right, thank you. That's really interesting, because also the idea of partnerships is something that the industry does with models in terms of agencies, and it's possibly something they need to adopt on the legal side. Thank you. Swati, what are the economics looking like?
So let me start with making sort of one broad point, and then I'll come to and show you a little bit more about what we're learning now from businesses. So the first thing to remember is that everything that was said before the referendum and that continued to be said after the referendum, nothing has changed in those terms, in terms of the economics of it. The numbers move 0.01%, and that's how you should think of them. They really don't matter. So if everybody told you earlier that a no deal would look like a 3% to 6% drop, they're going to tell you the same thing today. In terms of sort of a soft Brexit, yes, you can possibly really reduce those costs, because just like Alison mentioned right now, that, suddenly losing your qualifications is obviously a costly process, and that's coming simply because you signed a piece of paper which you could have avoided signing. So in that sense, all of those issues are still there. The broadly soft Brexit will try and alleviate some of those concerns which Alison pointed to. So if you go by that sort of estimate, roughly what you'd be thinking of is that, 1% drop in GDP every year. This might sound like a small number, but remember, this cumulates up. And this is telling you a broad average. This is not telling you for your particular sector what happens. So now we come to the second point. All of those concerns are still very much true, the economic impacts and what Brexit might do. I think where the focus has tried to shift now is to try and understand what is the interaction with how COVID has affected businesses and the businesses' ability to be able to prepare for the COVID and the Brexit shock together. So a lot of the work, so this is my second point, a lot of the work that we did in the run-up to the referendum, which was trying to be able to sort of estimate what these impacts to different sectors could look like because of all the increased trade barriers that would come about, we've kind of gone back and revisited some of the work in light of that, okay, now that COVID has happened and we can measure what the COVID impacts on businesses have been, can we try and correlate that with what we think the predicted impact from Brexit would be? So all we wanted to understand was, is it the same sectors who are going to be who've already been hit by COVID and are going to continue to be hit by Brexit, or are there different sectors? Roughly what you get is a complete mixed bag. So let me give you two examples. One is chemicals and pharmaceuticals. We know they didn't suffer as much during this crisis, the COVID crisis, because that's really where we all needed medicines at this point. But going forward, this is one of the sectors which is expected to suffer one of the most because the regulations are going to change. The ESMA is going to no longer be in London. So all of these issues become a real concern going forward. then this is sort of one example. The second example I can give you is arts and recreation, completely obliterated by this crisis, almost no activity happening. But going forward, they're not so EU dependent. So yes, there will be some negative impacts, but we're not talking about really widespread negative impacts here. So just keep in mind that, the sectors that are suffering now, the sectors that are expected to suffer later they can be quite different from each other. And now let me get to my third final point, which is to say, ultimately, COVID impacts are going to impact what happens to Brexit and how businesses are going to be able to prepare for Brexit. And that's the graph I want to show you. This is very, very new work that we're doing. And the CBI has basically shared their monthly surveys with us. So it's more a matter of how much we can manage to sort of process in terms of the data and be able to share and say that that's what's policy relevant. So if I can share my screen, that would be great. I think the host has to enable me.
I can't make you do it. So we're just going to ask SHOWstudio to do that for us, because I seem to be able to share my screen. But
okay, I've got it now.
You've got it. Fabulous.
So let me show you what we find here very, very broadly in terms of what the impacts have been already. So this is what you can see here on my slide. The first slide is showing you. Can you all see?
Yes.
Or do you want me to?
No, I can see it. It's great.
Okay, perfect. So what this is showing you is the first column is showing you what's been the average impact for COVID on business volume. So these are what businesses are telling the CBI, that here's how much percentage business we've lost out. The green line is showing you the total, and you can look at your own sector, which is roughly manufacturing and wholesale. You're kind of somewhere in the middle if you think of fashion more broadly. And the creative industries are going to be here in the arts, entertainment, and recreation sector.
Right.
Row of it. So the total impact has been about a 16% drop in business volume. This is just for September and October. I'm not accumulating up across the entire year what's happened.
Mm-hmm.
Then if you go further, firms are telling you that about 20% of them are telling you they're not even prepared for a deal scenario, which means typically in their mind, they're thinking some kind of soft Brexit scenario. If you look at a no deal scenario where we're getting to hard Brexit, 60% are prepared, but what's going to happen to those 41% who aren't prepared for Brexit yet? And what we can see further is that if you look at the percent of firms that expect a negative impact on business with a deal, that's already about 23%. And then you can add another 20% or so more if you think that there's going to be no deal Brexit. And those are the sort of fractions of firms that are prepared. As you might imagine, of course, small businesses are overrepresented in terms of how much they are prepared for Brexit. But this is a much broader story. Even large, really big businesses who you would think have all the wherewithal to have been prepared in the last 4 years are still finding it very difficult, and COVID just adds to those problems. And now let me tell you what those problems look like, which might be sort of something which is shared within the sector very much as well. So one is, of course, we all don't know still what the Brexit outcome looks like. And we probably actually won't even know that even if it's some kind of deal gets done with now, we still don't know what the next 5 years look like in terms of what the EU relationship would be, sort of long term, as well as what the relationship with these other countries is going to be. And I think the US change in administration is actually kind of relevant for that, because that's really going to tell us, are we included or excluded in that, big powerhouse or not. Ultimately, size matters. And if you don't decide what your policy would be, that's going to hurt your businesses. And of course, you throw in a COVID shock over and above that. And what's really sort of striking to me from this picture is that the percentage of firms who think of uncertainty on Brexit outcome to be a problem in terms of their Brexit preparation are just about the same as those who are saying COVID. So, this just shows you how important that policy uncertainty is from the point of view of businesses. So I'll stop here with just to give you a little bit more grim news if you're not unhappy enough with COVID and lockdown. It's not looking any prettier. It hasn't become prettier. If anything, it's going to probably look a bit uglier unless some really quick policy action is taken, which moves more towards ensuring the trade barriers don't rise.
Right. So it's the other thing is in our work at Fashion Roundtable, we've been looking at the end of the VAT retail export scheme, which is being proposed by the Chancellor to end. And business across the sector is very concerned about that end. The estimated impacts are in the billions, thousands of jobs, because it will stop the tourists from being able to come to this country and claim back their VAT. And I think that canny tourists do their maths and they check now if they're going to buy a big brand, whether it's cheaper here, because an international tourist tends to not just come to Britain, they tend to go on the Eurostar and into mainland Europe. And with Charles de Gaulle now being having more flights into it this year, obviously it's a weird year, than Heathrow, I see this as an escalation of this downward spiral. And this issue particularly worries me because this is a choice rather than an impact. They're choosing an impact based on, I'm not quite sure what data they're getting, but the data is being shown to be incorrect. I had a long conversation with William from the British Retail Consortium that will be shown across this week. And it really worries me that they don't seem to understand the impacts of this, because you've got heritage brands who maybe can't afford to open in Paris, and why should they? But you've also got an international market who might not want to have so many flagship stores here at a time when Arcadia Group's gone under. Debenhams now, the sales fallen through, probably because Nick Ashley's decided he wants to buy Arcadia Group rather than Debenhams. Do you have a retail landscape with economic impacts already? And as Alison said, Topshop or Arcadia employed as many people? Topshop alone employed as mand people as the fishing industry, which we've heard a lot about. What do you think people need to be aware of, or chat, or maybe say to their elected representatives about about this? Because it has felt like, a hysterical identity issue, and now it's something that they just can't cope, because it's been such a hard year for so many businesses and so many people on lots of levels, including mental health, that there's an overload of what people can cope with. But how do we ask them to get some sense of clarity from numbers that look actually, really difficult for business? What should they be doing?
So I really think it's very important at this point to be organized as businesses, for the reason that, let me give you two examples. One, so I actually work with government in an advisory capacity, so not representing business at all, but being the independent sort of person on it. And it has been, I have actually found it really striking, whether it was the Bay's Economic Recovery Task Force or whether it was the DIT, which I also advise, both of them. It's really quite incredible how organized other business groups are, other sectors are, in terms of being able to make their voices heard and to say that, yes, these are specific regulations that really matter to us and they need to be represented. I think if that sort of voice isn't there, it's very likely will be ignored. And it's something that, the civil servants and the government people themselves are too busy to notice that there is a particular glitch somewhere. Mm. So I think it's really important to be organized and to make your voices heard in Parliament.
I think you're right. Until I set up Fashion Roundtable, there wasn't this kind of engagement with policy that I have now on a very daily level. I'm back and forth with Whitehall and with Westminster. And we're a relatively small new organisation. I think you're completely right. The other sectors are putting money into the work that I do, so that they've got a coherent voice, and not only that, they've got a very strong voice. And they can be sectors such as fishing that actually make a lot less. But equally in the creative sectors, I've seen film and music be much more coherent in their ask. And guess what? Film is on one of those critical job lists.
I think that's exactly right. I think the same happened with our profession, getting this address for service chain. We have one governing body, one representative body, and they galvanised really the profession to lobby MPs, local press, everything, because it was such a big issue that would affect them, other industries. But being that coherent voice meant that it's got through, and I completely agree. And I think that's where the creative and fashion industry falls down through no fault of their own, just because it's a lot of very, very small businesses. And so coming together in any kind of way is very difficult. So something like Fashion Roundtable and what they do to represent the industry as a whole is invaluable.
Thank you. It's really, I think with the retail export scheme, the VAT retail export scheme, I have seen a lot of cross-party engagement, actually a lot of backbench Tories, and also Ed Vaizey now in the House of Lords. because there's been quite a coherent, like we've been asked to help with getting early day motion signatories to an EDM by Tracy Crouch, who's a former sports minister and backbencher in the Conservatives, because they can see the arguments in terms of the economics. What worries me is sometimes the data and the economics that are going into government, Swati, don't match the data. And that's another problem. And that's why we've been collating data, because ONS doesn't have a lot of data on the fashion industry. And I don't understand why.
I can add a couple of things to that. So one of the things that I do is sit on this DIT modeling review panel.
The Department of International Trade. Yeah.
So to put it very simply, what it is trying to tell the Department of International Trade whether the data that they're using is relevant for the questions that they want to answer, which is what should policies look like for sectors. Yeah. It baffles me that it's been 4 years. Where are those sustainability impact assessments which say that this is what the sectoral impacts would look like? If those don't exist in government, you as a sector should be really concerned that your voices are just not even on the table. It's not even on the agenda at the moment. Mm-hmm. And I think that really is where you should be pushing for. And I think one of the things that we are pushing for as academics is to try and get government to talk to people in industry as well as to worker unions or whatever, to get a sense of what the really sort of deep, fine impacts, the really granular impacts would be, rather than coming up with broad statistics like I gave you that, 1% drop in GDP. Well, what does that mean for somebody who's actually a textile worker as opposed to somebody who's a banker in the city? I mean, those are very, very diverse things, and those really need to be appreciated to that degree.
No, you're right. I think also, like, we've been working a lot on the shortage occupation list, the SOL visa list. First of all, the MAC, which is the Migration Advisory Committee, did no COVID impact assessment. They did no impact assessment on the data coming out of Leicester about modern slavery and workers. They've made recommendations that workers coming into the EU, and that starts really soon, have to earn over 25,600. Garment workers in the UK are primarily not UK passport holders. We're not starting the education on learning the skills, the T levels, until September 23. And so we need non-UK workers, but we're not going to get them in because we've set a tier. It's completely illogical to me. And what worries me is the news that we're getting of trafficked workers, not just trafficked in Bangladesh, but trafficked into the UK to fill those jobs. And if you want people to eradicate modern slavery, and you want a Brexit that's smooth, and you want onshoring and business to flourish, then you have to allow either you have to drop the income assessment because they're not paying £1,000 for a suit. So why are they making decisions that would mean that the worker had to earn 25,600 by then paying £1,000 per suit that they're wearing to work in Whitehall? They don't. So they're all walking around in a high street suit, wondering why the worker that's made that suit, if they're in the UK, isn't earning 25,600. Well, do the maths, basic maths on what you're wearing, and then the cost of what that person who's made it, even if they work in the best factory with the best conditions, can earn. And the problem we found when we were doing the data, because we did a massive search for the SOL, was the job descriptions for the sector aren't even recognised by the Office of National Statistics. So it comes back to there isn't the right box to tick. So how can you collect data if you don't have the right box to tick? I mean, personally, I'm half Turkish, and I consistently have to tick a box of half white British and half Asian, but they don't mean my Asian. They mean a different kind of Asian. So if I can't even on my racial identity, and so many of the jobs in the sector don't have the right box, then you cannot find the right. This is the problem about giving them new data that tries to help them inform new solutions, because I think beforehand, the job descriptions there, I was speaking to a guy at the ONS, and it's like, you've got leather makers, you've got this job description. They sound like something out of Poldark. They're not relevant to the sector that we're in. And it becomes problematic. So everyone's ticking other consistently. My job was other because they thought a stylist was a hairdresser. So it's a problem also of not even just they're not giving the data. The data questions aren't fit for the purpose of the solutions that are needed, I think is what I'm trying to say.
I couldn't agree more with you. And I think this is this is an issue we're going to face even more now, where we don't even know what does it even mean to collect output data from a firm that's been shut for a month. So if you think that it's bad now, it's only going to get worse. And I think it's really important that you as a sector collect the data from your own sector at least, and try and sort of systematize some of these things, because ultimately your voice in Parliament is, to some degree related to, the political component of it, like the fisheries sector, but also in terms of what your value added is to the economy. And I think being able to really articulate that is really, really fundamental here.
Yeah. Thank you. I think that's very true. I mean, we call it the value of fashion, and I think it's so important because quite often, even within the creative sectors, I feel fashion's like, the glossy one, but overlooked. And you'll hear a lot of news about music or film or video games, and they all make a lot less for the UK economy. And the fat retail export scheme worries me, because it's worth a lot more than the fishing industry, over double, and yet we're not hearing very much about it. And I heard fishing yet again on the news this morning. I just wanted to say, I'm kind of like, it's my trigger word, guys, so we do know that. I'm sorry to the fishing industry. I'm sure it's a wonderful industry to work in, and I'm sure that they want to be supported, but so do we. And I think that's the message I'm trying to get out here. You're all such wonderful experts. I just wanted to say thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us. If anybody's got any questions, please email admin@fashionroundtable.co.uk, and we can do our best to answer those. But also, I think it's very true that if you've got concerns, lobby your elected member of Parliament. You can go and find your MP online. It's really quick to email them, and they want your vote. So they want to know what your concerns are. And UK in a Changing Europe is a fantastic resource for all the up-to-date UK-EU relations. Alison is also, you're on Instagram as well. I know you are, so you can find her on Instagram. And Swati's at the LSE, which is the most prestigious economics university, I'd say, in the world. So if you need to get to her, she's quite fabulous, but come to us and we can help you get to her with any questions. But you also have lots of resources online, don't you, Swati?
Yeah, we have a number of things which people can sort of look at.
Yeah. And I'm always so impressed by your brilliant insights, and I want to just say thank you very much. And I'm also loving Nav's green walls, which she tells me are the same paint as the House of Commons, which I just think is brilliant. It's so brilliant.
I'm also going to give a shout out to LSE, because I've got my LSE.
Yes.
That one's for you, Swati, as well.
Yeah, but it's also nice purple and green, the suffragette colours as well, of course. Well, thank you very much to everyone, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.